kept this to myself for over a year now, partly because I wanted to forget it, but mostly because it still scares me whenever I replay it in my head. Writing it out might finally help me put it behind me, and maybe, just maybe, it'll serve as a warning for someone else. I was 26 and had just moved to Idaho. The outdoors was always my escape, and I'd grown comfortable hiking alone. So one weekend in early autumn, I drove north toward the remote forests near Priest Lake. I'd picked a quiet, moderately challenging trail, far enough from civilization to feel alone, but close enough that I felt safe. I arrived early Saturday morning, parked my truck, grabbed my gear, and set off. The weather was cool but clear, with sunlight filtering through the tall pines. For the first couple of hours, I didn't see another person, just squirrels, birds, and deer that scattered at my approach. About 4 miles in, I stopped briefly to rest on a fallen log and check my map. The woods around me were silent except for distant bird calls. That's when I first noticed it, a vague feeling of being watched. At first, I dismissed it as paranoia, but the sensation didn't fade. It felt as though eyes were studying me from somewhere hidden in the dense undergrowth. Trying to ignore it, I stood and continued down the trail, but after about 20 minutes, the feeling intensified. I turned quickly, scanning the forest behind me, my pulse quickening. Nothing, just trees, shadows, and silence. I took a deep breath, shook my head at my nerves, and kept moving. Another half-hour passed, and the trail narrowed as it climbed gently uphill. Then, around a slight bend, I froze in my tracks. About 30 feet ahead, a man stood motionless on the side of the trail, partially concealed by a cluster of trees. He didn't look like a typical hiker. He wore faded jeans, a stained brown jacket, and worn work boots, no backpack or hiking gear in sight. His hair was long, tangled, falling around a gaunt, unshaven face. His eyes were wide, fixed on me, his expression unreadable. I felt my throat go dry. "Hey," I managed to say, trying to sound casual. "Everything okay?" He didn't answer. He didn't move, just stared, unblinking. A chill ran down my spine. Every instinct told me to turn around, but I was miles from my car, and retracing my steps seemed more dangerous. So instead, I moved cautiously forward, attempting to project confidence I didn't feel. As I passed him, he slowly turned, pivoting to keep facing me, his eyes never leaving mine. I forced a weak smile and nodded. Again, he said nothing, showed no reaction, just stared silently until I'd moved past. Once he was out of my direct sight, I quickened my pace, glancing repeatedly over my shoulder until he was finally obscured by the trees. My heartbeat roared in my ears, but I'd barely gone a quarter mile when I heard the unmistakable crunch of footsteps following behind me. I stopped, turned around sharply, and he was there standing dead center on the trail, about 50 feet back, hands at his sides, still silent, still staring. Now terrified, I shouted firmly, "Stop following me, man. Leave me alone." He didn't respond. His face stayed blank, expressionless. I raised my voice again, threatening to call the police, though I knew my phone had no signal. Still, he didn't move. I walked faster now, almost jogging, but no matter how fast I moved, when I glanced back, he was there, always the same distance away, always watching. Panic started to set in. I felt hunted. After another mile, the trail split. Instinctively, I took the lesser-used path, hoping it might lead away from him. Soon, though, the trail grew faint, disappearing completely into thick brush. I realized with a sinking feeling that I'd made a mistake. I'd wandered off the marked path. I paused, desperate, listening carefully. Silence. Maybe I'd finally lost him. I waited several tense moments before carefully making my way back toward the main trail. When I reached it again, I stopped cold. Directly ahead, there he stood, in the middle of the path, facing me, waiting. I nearly collapsed from fear. My options were limited. I could run back into the woods and risk getting lost or injured, or confront him head-on. Summoning every ounce of courage, I shouted again, louder, with anger and fear mingled together. "Stay the hell away from me." But something was different this time. His eyes narrowed, and slowly, disturbingly, he began moving toward me. His movements were slow, deliberate, mechanical. I backed away, fumbling in my pocket for my pocket knife, my only means of defense. He continued approaching, never breaking his cold, unfeeling gaze. When he was 20 feet away, I saw clearly the grime and dirt caked into his skin, his unkempt beard, his hollow, sunken eyes. Then, suddenly, voices echoed from further down the trail, the faint, distant chatter of approaching hikers. The man froze mid-step, cocking his head slightly toward the sound. Without another glance at me, he stepped calmly off the trail and melted silently into the forest, disappearing from view. Shaken, I sprinted toward the voices until I stumbled into a small group of hikers. My hands trembled, my voice cracked as I explained I'd been followed. They escorted me back to the trailhead, and I immediately reported the incident at a nearby ranger station. The ranger listened solemnly, nodding slowly. "Yeah," he said after a pause. "We've had other reports, like yours. Never caught the guy, though. We think he lives somewhere out there. Hikers have reported him following them, sometimes for miles, but he's never hurt anyone. At least, not that we know of." He assured me they'd send a team to check the area. I thanked him and drove home, shaken and traumatized. I never heard what became of their search. Since then, I haven't hiked alone. Every so often, late at night, I wake in a cold sweat, convinced I'm back on that trail, trapped beneath that silent, unblinking stare. And even now, more than a year later, I find myself peering anxiously over my shoulder whenever I walk alone, half expecting to see him there, silently watching from the shadows. I've tried to forget what happened that night, but no matter how many years go by, I still see his face in my dreams. It was supposed to be a simple overnight trip. I was hiking in a national forest in Oregon, nothing extreme, just me, my pack, and the trail. I'd done solo hikes before, and I liked the peace of being alone out there. That afternoon, I reached a small clearing near a creek, the perfect spot to set up camp. The forest was quiet. The only sounds were the water and the breeze through the pines. I set up my tent, gathered some wood, and built a small fire as the sun started to dip behind the ridge. Everything felt normal, until it didn't. Sometime after dark, maybe around 10 or 11, I was sitting by the fire when I heard something, a splash, like someone stepping into the creek. I froze, listening. Another splash, slow, deliberate. I grabbed my flashlight, stood up, and shined it toward the sound. And there he was, a man, standing in the creek maybe 20 feet away. He wasn't moving, just standing there, knee-deep in the water, facing me. His clothes looked wrong, like old, tattered work clothes, dark and heavy, dripping wet. His hair hung in strings plastered to his face. I called out, "Hey, are you okay?" No answer. He didn't move, didn't even blink, just stared at me, water dripping from his clothes into the creek. The fire crackled behind me. The night seemed to get colder. I backed toward my tent, heart pounding, keeping my light on him. But he didn't come closer. He just stood there, like he was waiting for something. Finally, I ducked into the tent, zipped it shut, and grabbed my knife. I didn't sleep. I just sat there, listening. For what felt like hours, I heard the water. Splash, splash, like he was still standing there, shifting his weight. At some point before dawn, the sound stopped. When the first light came, I stepped out, exhausted and shaking. The creek was empty, but on the bank, leading toward my camp and then away into the woods, were wet footprints, bare feet. I packed up and left in a hurry, constantly looking over my shoulder. I still wonder what he wanted and why he was just waiting. I've never talked about what I found out there, and honestly, I wish I hadn't seen it at all. It was supposed to be a short afternoon hike. No gear, no overnight, just a few miles to clear my head. I was in a part of national forest I didn't know well, but it was marked on the map, and I wasn't worried. The trail started normal enough. A dirt path winding through tall pines, sunlight filtering down in patches. It was quiet, peaceful, but maybe a mile in, I noticed something that made me stop. There was a tree at the edge of the trail, and carved into its bark was a symbol. A large circle with a line running through it, and what looked like strange letters underneath. It wasn't graffiti, it was too precise, too deep. I told myself it was probably just kids messing around. I kept walking, but then, maybe 100 yards further, there was another one, different symbol. This time, 2 overlapping triangles and more of those letters. Or were they runes? And then another, and another. It was like the deeper I went, the more of them there were. Always on trees that seemed deliberately chosen, older ones, standing just off the trail. That's when I noticed the quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing. The deeper I went, the heavier the air felt, like the forest itself was watching. I know I should have turned back, but something made me keep going. Maybe curiosity, maybe just the strange pull of it all. The trail curved down toward a small ravine, and that's where I saw it. A clearing. And in that clearing, bones. Not scattered like an animal kill, arranged. A ring of bones, small ones. Maybe from rabbits, maybe from something bigger, I don't know. In the center of the ring, a tall post with fresh carvings cut deep into the wood. Symbols, the same as the ones on the trees, and tied to the post with coarse rope. A bundle of what looked like feathers, hair, and scraps of cloth. The air smelled wrong, like rot. I felt sick. I turned to go, and that's when I saw footprints, bare feet, large, leading from the post toward where I stood, and back again. Whoever made this was nearby. I didn't stop to think. I ran, hard. Branches slapped my face, tore at my arms. I ran until I couldn't hear my own footsteps over my heartbeat. When I finally made it back to my car, I didn't look back. And I've never gone near that trail again.